Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our Lean Focus webinar series. Today's webinar will be covering the topic of accelerating the pace of new product introduction with a Lean phase gate system. My name is April Lee, and I'll host you today. I'm the Managing Director of Lean Focus, but our real presenter today is our VP of Innovation, George Ellis. We're so thrilled to be able to share today's webinar with you, as it's not often known how Lean concepts apply towards growth, revenue generating areas, or R&D. And so today's topic will highlight how Lean concepts can really apply towards your innovation journey. George has seen many iterations, common practices, and common mistakes in the product development phase gate process, which he'll be sharing with you today. So we'll move ahead to the next slide. Thanks, George. Before we begin, we just want to remind you that today's presentation is the proprietary information of Lean Focus and should not be used, disclosed, or reproduced without the consent of Lean Focus. Title in into this presentation, and all information contained herein remains at all times in Lean Focus. With the next slide, some quick webinar logistics. So you are all in listen-only mode. There are PDF handouts available to you on this topic that you can download from the control panel. For the Q&A, please feel free to type in your questions into the chat, and we'll be answering the questions at the end of the webinar. And a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you about a day later. If you don't see it right away, check your spam folder. Sometimes it will end up there. Next slide. So a little bit about Lean Focus before we get into the meat of the presentation. We are a consulting and training firm that specializes in really developing high performance cultures and transforming those cultures. We really try to focus on teaching, coaching, sustaining, and using our Lean Focus proprietary business systems tools and processes. We do this by developing and placing driven leaders, either through our training practices for existing talent or our executive talent solution services, where we specialize in recruiting and placing top Lean talent to hit the ground running. We stress that change management element of a culture sustainment, helping implement a continuous improvement mindset throughout and developing ways of working for the team. We apply our proven systems through both our implementation methodology, as well as we license our materials for companies to be able to achieve these results over the long term. Next slide. We do have 8 different practice areas that I slightly touched on the previous slide, where this is how we help identify on the front end, what do clients need, what areas of improvement do they need, and how can we help apply that. And so here in our different practice areas, it will apply towards the different unique elements of organizations. So we can either come in and help you achieve Lean elements of safety, quality, delivery, inventory, and cost. We can work on growth elements. How do we drive revenue? How do we improve margins and customer retention? Or even mergers and acquisitions and integrations or private equity. We specialize really in identifying the different ways and strategic areas that you're trying to drive in your business. I mentioned that we have our talent solutions, and our talent team is really keen on identifying this top Lean talent and being able to place them in areas where they can do good and help support the culture that you're trying to drive. And meanwhile, we'll help you identify what focus solutions you might need, whether it's a tool, a process, a certification process for your organization, but we'll help you identify what is the best way to achieve those areas. On the procurement side, we have specialists who really have seen and done this on many, many iterations, and they'll be able to help you identify how do we achieve driving those bottom line results. And then especially for today's topic, innovation, which George leads and helps us develop ways to maximize and improve the product development system across your entire innovation journey. So with that, on the next slide, we'll just show you some examples of companies that we've previously worked with and helped achieve these results. And as you can see, our methodology is industry agnostic. We can really help drive applicability of Lean concepts towards manufacturing, operations, but also commercial areas such as sales, marketing, customer service, and finance. And especially for today's topic, R&D. So on the next slide, we'll be talking about some of the tool sets and the way that we define our tool sets, which are also licensed out to help you build your own build your own business system. These tools can be categorized towards the areas of your development and culture that you're trying to improve on. And so we've developed a foundational tool set, but also there's areas and tools that are specific to driving growth, lean, and leadership. So these are just some examples of how you might identify and pick and choose your own business system that we can help you build out. Next slide. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to your presenter today. His name is George Ellis. George, take it away.
Okay, thanks, April. Appreciate the introduction and walking us through what the company can do for folks. Just a quick word about me. I spent about 30 years in R&D. I was working engineer. I developed software and hardware, and I wound up falling in love with Lean when I took over as a functional leader as the VP of R&D for X-Rite, a company that was part of Danaher. And I saw how applying lean thinking to R&D, it was hard. You couldn't just bring a factory tool into an R&D group, but when you did it, the results were just absolutely amazing, and watched the same group of people accomplish so much more than they had been. So I really fell in love with it, and so that's why I'm doing it for a living right now. I really want to be part of lean and lean transformations, just as a full-time job. April's already given us an introduction. We're just about to drop into talking about problems related to project and phase gate systems, and then you can see we'll talk a little bit about root causes, and then I'll have a short discussion about value and waste, and then we'll dive into phase gate systems, how they work, and then how we go about transforming a phase gate system at a company, and then we'll talk about next steps, and finally we'll have time for questions. So the first thing I want to say is, we look at innovation as a journey, and it starts over on the left side at Aspire, where you're figuring out what customers do you want to serve with new products. I mean, you're trying to understand, how are we going to bring products through a funnel and get them out to customers, all the way down to collecting voice of customer or VOC, getting requirements clear, and then a lot of things we do. This is the heavy lift of product development. This is where all the money is spent. It's in the area where we have a lean phase gate system. That's what we're going to talk about today. But there are other tools that you're using. Design for manufacturing, visual project management, and we talk about those in other webinars. And then finally, we launch the product, and then we go out and manage the launch and create a successful product that really brings value to our customers. That journey is between 5 and 10 years for most companies. It's a long time. And today, we're just going to talk about one part of it. We're just going to focus on the lean phase gate system. Sometimes it's easy to think of it as can I use the word boring? I mean, people will think of phase gate systems as boring because they are very structured and they have a lot of requirements, but they are the heart, they are the basic, where we put the information that tells us what has to be done to meet the requirements of our organization and our regulatory bodies. And so they're so important, and they are work to keep up, but when done well, they can you'll wind up with products that meet needs better, that meet regulatory needs, to get through faster, and have less rework, and that makes everybody happier. So what's the burning platform? Why are we talking about this? Well, projects are disappointing for, according to the survey here, 50% of organizations, and I think that's generous. Normally, when I work in new product development, I think the disappointment is very high. Projects are normally late. There's a lot of rework. That things never seem to end. I don't know if this resonates with you at your organization, but in a lot of companies, it's like the project, we only got it 3/4 of the way done. Now we got to have another extension on the project to go get that done. But over that year, we learn more, and it's like projects never finish. They just keep getting added. And when that happens, then it has a whole follow-on to the whole organization. If I go to my marketing team and my operations team and say, this is going to launch on April 1st, it's going to be ready, and then we miss by 3 months, well, what do you think happens next time when you tell them that? They're not going to be as eager to be ready. And the worst thing about a late project is you open the door for competitors. You have a project, you go out, you put all the information out, but you can't really provide it. Now you've made the sale for a competitor that might be able to provide it. The second thing we want to talk about, and we'll talk about this a lot today, is phase gate systems. They're very common. Most companies, I would say, that I deal with, the majority have been using them since, let's say, the 90s anyway, and they bloat. It's really easy to add a requirement. It doesn't take much to say that, hey, we just had a problem in the factory. We need to go add another element to our phase gate system so that doesn't happen again. That's easy. What's hard is to say, hey, we've got some old requirements over here that we need to take away. That's really hard. And so what happens over time is phase gate systems, they bloat. They get big, you keep adding requirement after requirement. After a while, people don't have the time to really do the requirements well, but more requirements keep coming. And so we want to deal with that problem as well. We want a right-sized phase gate system. Here's another example of a survey that when people use proven project management practices, which phase gate systems will make up a part of that. I'll explain that in just a moment. But the reasons for failure, the top reasons for failure, according to this survey, is that there's changes in the organizational priorities or project objectives change. The requirements are inaccurate. We don't have really good vision, so we build products that really were maybe too incremental, and poor communication. Phase gate system really focuses on the third and fifth one. So we'll talk about that as we go on, but it's the inaccurate requirements and the poor communication that a well-built phase gate system just really crushes. So let's back up for a moment and talk about the difference between symptoms, problems, and root cause. So a symptom is something that's obvious. It's hard to quantify, but you have it. So a lot of times people use this example: I'm tired, I don't feel good. There's a problem. That problem is quantifiable. So I have a fever, and then there's a root cause. I've got a perforated appendix, for example, might be the root cause. It's very important, as when we talk about ourselves and our health, it's really easy to keep those separate. The problem is when we start talking about what's going on in our product development system, it's easy to get symptoms and problems and root causes mixed up. So we're going to work hard to keep them separate. So what are some symptoms of a phase gate system and where I'm struggling? The requirements are confusing and bloated. We talked about that. The work that comes out from the team is below expectations. The boss feels like, we just didn't do that great a job. And then we talked about this already. Projects are late or partially complete. We have to try again, or we find a major issue after we launch. Now we got to pull back. And anybody ever dealt with a sales group? The global sales team where you launch it, and then there's this about 4 weeks later, and then you pull back, and then 4 weeks later you're ready to relaunch, and they don't really believe you. And so all of that, pain it's obvious. But the problem it creates is poor financial performance of new products. And I think it's very typical to see financial performance at under half of what was expected. This says half of companies are disappointed. I guess those are two similar measures. But those complaints aren't common among in company leadership. But what are some of the root causes related to phase gate systems? Well, the requirement definitions can be poorly defined or out of date. That's a very common one. It's like we already talked about this bloating. We can have teams that are siloed. And so maybe an engineering team goes out and does some solutions, but they don't have a structured way to work with the manufacturing group or the sourcing group to make sure that we can bring this product out. Or maybe we're solving a problem that the sales team doesn't, they're meeting with the customers and the customers aren't seeing it. And we want to take this silo out so that we have strong cross-functional teams. And this as an R&D leader, we fail to plan the project according to the requirements. So what does that look like? Well, we didn't really look at the requirements. We didn't leave enough time to do the work. You know, you go to the boss and the boss is like, what's going on here? Why isn't this on time? You go to the engineers, they're like, well, you know, we didn't leave enough time to do that testing. You know, UL doesn't respond that fast, or, you know, we have a 510K and it just takes time to process that, whatever your situation might be. And there's no owner, because if you don't do a good plan, you don't have ownership during the plan. And if you don't have ownership during the plan, when things go wrong, and they always seem to go wrong at some point, how do you get the team to pull together and fix it? So those are, we'll come back to these later in the presentation, but these are the kinds of root causes that we want to address. So I want to talk just a moment about value and waste. Lean thinking makes a hypothesis that everything we do is either value or waste. So everything I do in my day, I'm either creating value for a customer, and when we think about product development, I'm creating something that's fit for use, or it's compliant to the requirements, the project's on time. Those are value. Everything else is waste. This is really different from how most people think naturally. Naturally, most people think if I'm busy, I must be doing something good. If I work 10 hours, I get more done than if I work 8. But actually, that's just talking about the effort that you put in. Lean makes a differentiation between value and waste. And here's the stunning part. Most lean experts, and I'm with them, believe that 80 to 90% of what we do is waste. So, you know, if you think about it, if I have like a perfect day, get everything exactly right, I don't miss a single thing while I'm reviewing drawings or software, I have a perfect day. Think how much you get done. Compare that to your average day. Emails coming in, people calling you, getting confused, going too quickly over something, missing a defect, whatever the case may be. Compare that theoretical perfect day to your average day, and I think you'll come to the same conclusion that 80 or 90% of waste, it's probably about right. You know, how do you recognize waste? When you're on a factory floor, waste is easy to see. It's either buggies of work in progress, so I just look for buggies of parts in a factory, or it's stacks of scrap. So if I want to find waste out on a factory floor, I can see it with my eyes. Well, what happens when you go into product development? You don't have that anymore. There's nothing to see because everything is invisible. I mean, it's work product. It's in people's heads and it's in documents that are not easy to see. And so the way that we find waste, the first thing is it's frustrating. If you think about whatever is in your job, the most frustrating thing that's happened to you this week, I guarantee you that there's waste at the bottom of it. You know, I had to go do this thing over. I did it once and it wasn't right. You know, and now I've got to do it again. And people are mad at me because it's late. That's really frustrating. And that's the sort of thing that a phase gate system, that's the frustration it can help relieve. So that when we do things right the first time, or when we do things right, they're right the first, when we do things, they're right the first time. And, you know, that makes work a lot more enjoyable. Waste is large. We talked about that. It's hidden. Like I mentioned, you can't see it. It's systemic. Most waste is caused by good people trying to do the right thing. There's not a lot of evil people in engineering. People don't go into engineering and software development and science so that they can come be malicious at their company. They're trying to do the right thing. They've worked for years to get into the position that they're in their job. It's hidden, and we're like fish swimming in water. We don't know we're in that water. And so, you know, the fact that waste is systemic, it's really important to understand it's hidden. Of course it's hidden. If you could see it, you'd get rid of it because, you know, most people, almost everybody that works in product development, they basically have intentions of doing the right thing. And it's destructive. We talked about that a little bit. One of my favorite authors and perhaps the inventor of lean thinking, he invented the Toyota production system. His name is Taiichi Ohno. He said, if you're going to do Kaizen, if you're going to improve continuously, you've got to start by assuming things are a mess. And I think we can all agree 85% waste is a mess, but that's where we start. Now, I want to one last couple of slides on effort, value, and waste. So when we have, remember I talked earlier, value and waste, if we sum those, that's our total effort. But effort is not value. And you know, one of the things I think we've all experienced it, I've certainly experienced it many times. you're behind, the project's late, whatever, there's a problem with a customer, and the boss is like, get it fixed now. And so what that does is that forces you to put out a pulse of effort, work late, work on the weekend, do some kind of something to put out more effort. And when you do that, you do create more value. It definitely works. But the problem is if you're in a wasteful system while you're creating that value, you're also creating more waste because you haven't changed the way we work. What happens eventually, the focus turns elsewhere. There's not as much pressure on a particular situation. And so there's a fleeting benefit. We have to use it sometimes. I'm not beyond having to say, wow, we've got to get this done. We've just got to really work hard this week. But you can't run a company by just constantly pushing people to work hard. You've got to figure out a way to cut waste. Because you see, if we cut waste, even if effort remains constant, value will increase. And then there's one of my favorite things that happens, I've watched it happen lots of times, is that as people have less waste in their work, there's less frustration. They like their job better. They're getting, they're not over there fighting with doing something the third time. They're over doing something really creative, and they enjoy their work, and their focus and their effort naturally rises as they enjoy their jobs. And so all of these things together, this provides a sustainable benefit, a sustainable increase in value to our customers as we cut waste. And in innovation, well, waste hides in plain sight. One of the problems with innovation is you're dealing with some of the smartest people in the world, right? You're dealing with people who have PhDs in optical engineering or chemistry, or they've been in an area for 15 or 20 years. They're really good at what they do, and that can make it hard to see what's happening compared to like a factory floor. But when we really open up the doors, what do we see? We see waste permeates innovation workflows to the same extent it does other places. If you're angry, how about this waste? Somebody tells you to do something twice, it makes you mad. Then you write an email to 12 people, and then there's a bunch of responses, and the next thing you know, you spent 2.5 hours on an email that did nothing. There's some waste, and I think we've all seen that. Or the waste of waiting for an approval, the frustration of feeling my project going late while I'm waiting for an approval. And and frustration of, and I've had this happen. A month later, your boss coming and yell at you because the project's late. And when you say, I was waiting for approval, it's like, don't you try to blame it on me. All that frustration. It doesn't do anything good for the customer. And so when we really apply lean techniques, what happens is we create more value. Our projects come out on time. We generate the revenue because we're creating the value, and we get to spend more time in our craft. We get to spend more time being experts in the things we want to be experts in. And so when we get rid of waste, it just creates a cycle of virtue that spirals up and up. That's what we want to do. So phase gate systems. Now let's talk about what is a phase gate system. So let me just give some basics here. Every company has a phase gate system or something like it. So if you don't have exactly what you see here, I guarantee you have something like it. I'll come back to that in a moment. But let's begin with what every company has. There are 3 points that I've never seen a company that didn't have these 3 points in their development process. There's a moment when you start considering a new project. Now, maybe it's not real structured. Maybe it's just 1 or 2 people that talk about it, but we'll consider a project, and that's when it enters the funnel. There's a moment when we commit to a project. This moment that, you know what I'm talking about, where somebody has said it's going to take X months. You're going to have this many people, and you're going to get this much capital resources, and this is what we expect. There's always a moment. Now, maybe it's spread out over time and it's not as clearly defined as you'd like it to be, but there's always a moment when we commit to a project, and there's a moment when we launch a project. Now, I've met lots of people. I've met lots of phase gate systems. They all have these 3 points. Now, how do I build a phase gate system? Well, a phase gate system is defined as a series of phases that end in a gate. So they might be called design or verification or validation, launch prep. You'll have those kinds of names, but there's a bunch of tasks that have to occur between gates. Now, before the 1990s, the systems really weren't like this, and every project was kind of planned separately. I'm not saying in every company, but in general, phase gate systems didn't get popular until maybe the late 80s or early 90s. And before that, people just kind of planned a project, and the project's 18 months and very complicated. So they basically just broke them into pieces that defined when I was at a gate. This is a technique that's been used in construction for decades, and before it was applied in R&D, but that's a similar kind of a structure where you get to a certain point in the project before you can go further. That's the idea of a phase gate system. I'm sure you have something like this. Now, you might say, hey, we're just a startup company. We really don't have this. Guarantee you have something like it. It might be in people's heads, might be only partly written down, but everybody knows the things that we have to do, because ultimately we all have to take projects that we think we want to do and define them so we can do them. Then we have to design them, and then we have to do some kind of validation / verification testing, and then we have to launch them. And I've never been to a company that didn't have some combination of that. And then, there's some pretty common steps that have to happen in between. Now, we want those things to be crystal clear, and a great phase gate system has them super clear. They're not always like that, and that's part of what we're going to talk about. But you've got something like that, something that ties your R&D development and all the steps you have to do that connects that back to those commercial points. And I want to make this one last point at the bottom. A phase gate system is really probably the single most unique thing about product development. When you're in a phase gate system, that will be very peculiar to product development. People who are doing acquisitions, they have big projects, and people who are doing building factories, they have big projects. But phase gate systems, they're really for product development, and they're oriented around that. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, this innovation journey. I showed you this earlier with the aspirations and the deployment. You recall it's about 8 slides back. And the gates lay right in this. So as we teach this in Lean Focus, you'll want to have a gate at your pipeline where you have a clear definition of the projects we want to define. You'll hear me use that word clear a lot, because clarity takes out waste. There's going to be a moment where we're going to sign on the dotted line and say, this is our project. You'll probably have some internal phases that relate to partial testing. And then at a moment, you'll be ready to launch. And then at the end, we'd like you to have a gate that says, hey, we were a successful launch. A lot of people don't have this gate 5. They just, one of my bosses used to say, our products don't launch, they escape. And they just basically got to launch, sent the product out, hoped for the best, and went back and started the new project. That's not a great way to bring value to customers, but anyway, that does happen. But whatever you're doing, the innovation journey that we've shown you here will fit in your phase gate system. I've been with companies that have 8 phases. I've been with companies that have 3, but all of this fits in any practical gate system. So how do phase gate systems cut waste? Because you're looking at this, and you're probably thinking, what is this? It's like a list of things I have to do. How does that cut waste? Well, when you don't have phase gates, you wind up with confusing and missing requirements. Have you guys ever been to a meeting where you presented something and the boss yelled at you, or somebody yelled at you, maybe not your boss, but some exec yell at you, why didn't you do the market plan? Or where's your launch plan? Or how are you doing registration in Western Europe? And you're like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. And now we're at a point, you should have done it a month ago. And of course, there's a lot of waste in that. And that's that unpredictable review criteria. I remember one company I worked with, people, they just hated presenting because they never knew what they were going to get questioned on. And a phase gate system, it's very clear. This is what's expected. Here's all the rules of the game. They're in one place. We're not going to spring any new rules on you during the game, is how I look at it. Conflicts they become common in cross-functional teams. You guys have seen this, I'm sure. You give a person in sourcing a part that you want them to go buy 10,000 of, and they come back to you and say, how am I supposed to do this? This drawing isn't even ready for me to send out. Why wasn't I involved in this earlier? And you're like, I didn't know. And so a phase gate system, it breaks down those silos we talked about earlier, and it gets the teams prepared with each other. Whether you're talking about procurement or manufacturing, whether you're talking about marketing or sales, we're breaking down those silos so that we eliminate those conflicts and the finger pointing that comes later. And there's no foundation to improve. And for me, as a person who has given the rest of my career to continuous improvement, it's such a shame because we have such good people doing product development, But without a good phase gate system, when you learn something, where do you put it? Well, you learned it. Okay, we'll have a half-hour, lessons learned meeting where somebody sits and does a PowerPoint for 10 people, but did the organization really learn that lesson? I want to argue that if you don't put that lesson learned into your phase gate system, your organization didn't learn it. Maybe you learned it, maybe people on the team learned it. But you've got to get it into your phase gate system for the organization to have learned it and be able to build on it. And with the phase gate system, it's very clear what you have to do. There's a reliable standard, so I know how I'm going to be judged. Obviously, we're synchronizing teams. I already talked about that. And as I said, there's a place to put improvement. We go out, we build something, we take it to the factory, and we find out they don't do Joy-El connectors here. We don't have the equipment to do them. It's going to cost us a fortune. Please don't use Joy-El. We have to send those out. So we learn. Go back to our phase gate system. Check factory for standard fasteners. Don't use ones that aren't common. And then we create a standard list of factory fasteners. And 3 or 4 hours of work, and it's not the most fun work. It's a little bit tedious, but that mistake will never happen again. And that's the kind of small improvement that just cuts that waste. Remember, I talked about 85% waste. We just want to cut a little bit every year, because what we want to do is go from 15% contributing value to 20 and 25% value, which is a whole lot more value. So if we can just get rid of a little bit of the kind of waste I'm mentioning to you, we can really create a lot more value. One thing I want to mention to you, and a lot of you are working for a regulated company, a medical, dental, aerospace, and you're going to have a heavily regulated process, some sort of a quality management system that has got a regulatory body, your design control system that has to be maintained and is required by law. Okay, but you have a lot of things to do in your project that really are not required by law. So one of the first things we do when we start working on a phase gate system is we ask people, separate those things that the FDA or the FAA need to know about and the ones that they don't care about. Because a lot of people will take their entire phase gate system and dump it into their regulated design system. And then every time I want to go change, how I estimate what my sales will be in Europe, I have to go now through a process to update a document that's going to be treated like I'm changing something that's going to involve patient safety. So what we recommend is have a phase gate system that has a top layer that's not regulated and a bottom layer that is. Now, don't get me wrong. Everything that the FDA requires needs to be in your regulated system. Absolutely, don't take anything out. We're not talking shortcuts here, but we're talking about avoiding waste by putting things that don't need to be in that heavy system, And I see that all the time. And then you go back to somebody and say, well, let's change the way we do financial estimates. We can't. We got to, that's a big deal. We got to get involved with the Director of Regulatory Affairs. So, you don't want to be in that situation. Keep it nimble and put the things in the regulated process that need to be. So these are the 5 steps on how you improve a phase gate system. These are the 5 states for the whole tool. And I'm really going to focus on 2 of them here with you. But let me just mention them briefly. There's a value stream map where we really think about, hey, when I'm at gate 1, what's the value of what I have? I have a good idea. I probably have a market. When I get to gate 2, I have a defined product. Think of the value of that product, of what we have for that product going up and up. I've tested it. I know it works. I've launched it. I can actually get revenue. Well, think of that as a value stream map, and every step we're adding value to this product. Then we want to think about a simple process map, kind of similar. I showed you a moment ago a bubble, where there were the individual steps for the phase gate system. Think about each of those having a step that has to be carried out in that phase. It's just like a recipe in cooking. But then we want to graduate to the Makagami process map, and that's one of the ones I'm going to show you in a moment, so that we can really improve what we're doing. And so this is the first step where we're really taking a structured look at what we're doing and where it makes sense and where we want to improve it. And then from there, we're going to talk about the brown paper map, which is where you meet reality. And that's so number 3 and number 4 are the ones I'm going to talk about. And then we can also go from there to a Gantt chart or a visual project management template. We won't talk about that too much today, but that's part of the tool. So I want you guys to think about all of these 5 steps, but I'm really just going to talk about 3 and 4 in detail. So first off, let's talk about the Makagami diagram, which I just love them. So what they're doing is they're helping you take a structured look at your process. And you know, why is that? Remember I mentioned earlier about how processes bloat? And why do they bloat? Well, there's good reason for it. You know, it's easy to add something. Oh, we just had a customer call. They got really mad. We better put something in our phase gate system so this never happens again. And that happens over and over. And somebody from production comes and complains. And we forgot a regulatory step. And we're always adding. But you can't take things away one at a time. Why is that? Well, think about what it would really take to take a single item out. First off, somebody high up in the organization has to say, we don't need that step. We did need it 10 years ago, but we don't need it anymore. Well, there's not much reward for doing that. It doesn't really make a big difference in the system. And you know, it's just not an issue where people are going to elevate to that level just to take out one step. But when we look at a Makagami, we look across waste in many places, and we can make a lot of changes at once that allow us to then take out steps that are wasteful. And so it's not this, you know, we're not coming and saying, take this one step out and then having all, you know, and then arguing about that. We're actually going and restructuring and continuously improving the system. And it's the people who use the system who are doing this and recommending it. So in the Makagami, we show the process. Then we go down one more step and say, hey, what are all the things that I have to do this step? And so you can see there's like a series of documents, and we go and we plot those documents, and then we start trying to quantify. Now, it's really hard to quantify in product development. We know that. I know that sometimes you'll do a step, and maybe in one project that step wasn't even required, and the next project it takes you 3 weeks. Think about a patent application. I might be doing a project that doesn't have anything patentable. I might be working on one that has 5 potential inventions. Okay. It's understood that we just have to take rough guesses at the average project to get a feel for it. So how do we do this? We try to look at the worst project and the best project and pick something in the middle. And we also understand, you know, we are not on a factory floor. We can't put a stopwatch on product development, but we can still talk about scale and scope and get a sense of what things are driving the most work. And then so we get some things that we can get some level of quantification around. It's always a little bit unsatisfying. Everybody feels like that's not exactly right, but at least it gives us a chance to talk about it and get on the same page as a group. And then finally, we can start talking about the problems in that step. This puts us in a wonderful position to start looking at our entire phase gate diagram and our process and start really looking at where improvement needs to be made. And of course, you know, as you guys probably know this already, we're not going to come in and redo the entire phase gate system all at once. That's not how continuous improvement works. We're going to go take one phase where we've been having problems and it's caused us the most trouble, what Eli Goldratt calls the bottleneck constraint. We're going to go find the bottleneck constraint. We're going to work on that for a few days. And we're going to come back in a couple months. We're going to work on the next one for a few days. And over a period of 2 or 3 years, we're going to take a lot of waste out. But we're going to do it in not in a chaotic way, but we're going to do it in a very structured, predictable way to where we can see our system. And, you know, I can tell you, I've been through this so many times, but you're going to look at your phase gate system 2 years from now, and you're going to look back at where you are today, and you're going to say, how did we ever survive? But while you're actually doing the individual steps, you're never going to see what a big improvement you're making. That's the nature of continuous improvement. So that's a Makagami diagram. The second thing I want to show you is brown paper analysis. And I describe this as where reality strikes. And so what we do is we literally put a big brown piece of paper up on the wall, and it might be 30 feet long. And we go and get all of the documents, all of the things we have to do, go out on the factory floor, put up photographs, and actually look really what has to happen. Because every person who joins in this Kaizen, this event where we're making an improvement, they all have a different view of what happens based on the lens they look through. You know, if I'm a test engineer, I'm looking a lot in the later phases. If I'm a scientist, I'm looking in the earlier phases. If I'm in marketing, maybe in the middle, sales at the end. And everybody feels they understand it because they have a whole bunch of untested assumptions about what happens. And when they all see it at once, the first reaction is, wow, no wonder it takes so long. Or even, how do we ever get anything done? And so the Makagami, the brown paper bag is what brings the Makagami diagram to life. And you can really see what people go through to make improvement, to create products. And again, that's where we start hunting for the point of waste. We don't try to fix the whole 18-month process in one sitting. Let's go get one thing. Let's go do it great. Let's prove we did it great for 8 or 12 weeks. Usually we're looking for places where there's a project that's just approaching an area or is in it. We want to improve it and then use that project as a pilot. So we can say, oh yeah, that worked. Let's go get the next thing. Like I said, the brown paper bag is a great place to find out what really happens. So in terms of a case study, we use the method that I'm showing you. Pampered Chef was one of the clients that we used this with, and we went through this process. And I don't think it was very different from what I just described to you. A lot of learning, seeing on brown paper, the ultimate result was we got a huge improvement in new product development, and it came about by seeing the entire process and then being able to use that process, leveraging it to create truly innovative products. And so, so what we're showing you here, this is one example. It's worked in lots of places. And so I wanted to give you that example. So let's return back to our let's return back to our root causes of project failure. So when we have a phase gate system that's right sized, up to date, living, and used, what do we see? Well, we get rid of the problem where it's easy to add a requirement and hard to add and hard to remove. Because through having events, we can remove out of date requirements or overlapping requirements. The second one I want to talk about is requirements are poorly defined or out of date. I've seen this so many times. You guys might relate to this, but like an example is we have a phase gate system, but we kind of redid some of it. And so we have one of it that sits on this shared folder. We have another part of it that sits over on this folder. Oh yeah, our CTO, he keeps another one for his part. And then you have all these overlapping and unclear definitions of what has to happen. And in the meantime, we're changing our markets. We're going, not everything we're doing is, let's say class 2 medical device. And we're not changing to adapt with the fact that what we're doing is changing over time. Siloed teams, we've talked about this a lot. The whole phase gate system is based on bringing a cross-functional team together and making sure that everybody who is sitting around the product development table, the critical people in operations, marketing, sales, R&D, quality affairs, clinical trials, all of those people are sitting around the table so that we know that when we create this phase gate system, it meets a broad set of needs. We're going to break those silos down. And then failing to plan according to requirements. Well, when you give somebody a complete phase gate system, you really give them the best chance possible at coming up with a strong plan to do the project. Now, there's never a point when everything's known. There's no phase gate system that's going to tell you every single thing you have to do. We don't think that for a second. But we do know the better you get the standard down, the better you're going to be able to deal with the unknowns that will come. What's the result of that? Our financial performance is going to reach the expectation because we're going to really deliver value to our customers when we said we did at the cost that we thought we would. And that's how we see financial performance improve. I always like to mention this to engineers. It's not that we're doing some kind of a money game and all that matters is, did we make enough money to pay for, to generate a profit? The point is, if you're working on a product and it's delivering value, customers are going to come and they're going to acquire it from you. And so, your product can't be an amazing product if people aren't purchasing it. And so financial it's our ultimate view of how the customer valued our product. And so what are the symptoms? A living phase gate system, project work that usually meets expectations. I'm not going to say 100%. There's always issues, but the silly things go away. The things that happen again and again go away because we have a system that stops them. And our projects come in on time, on spec. And again, most of the time, we all know in product development, you're always going to run into something. I shouldn't say you're always. There's always a chance you're going to run into something that just couldn't be predicted. But if that's happening to you on every project, maybe a little more could be predicted than you're predicting. And your phase gate system, well, that's how you deal with things that have happened in the past. And that gives you a great map for going forward. So that's how we attack the root causes that harm our performance on our projects. So the next steps. If you're in this on the webinar and you're interested and you'd like to go a little bit further, one thing you can do is we have a little one pager here which just captures the webinar, and you can see the Makagami map and the brown paper map. I want to make sure those made it on the one pager. You can download this, and this will give you a little more information about it. And then if you're interested in pursuing the use of the tool at your company, and I'm actually doing 2 Kaizen events in the next 6 weeks on this topic. It's a very popular topic in innovation to come and help with that. And so if there's something, if you want to go further, then please contact us, reach out. We'd love to talk with you about it. Just a little bit more and we'll close up, but there's more. If you like this sort of webinar and you've enjoyed this, we're doing webinars every month. I want to say that next month is going to be tough because I'm traveling so much to do, partly for those guys as I just told you about. So we're not certain about next month, but we're doing roughly one webinar in innovation every month. And there's if you go to our website that you see right here, Thought Leadership and leanfocus.com, you can see, I want to say there's about 6 of them on different topics. I also do a weekly newsletter called The Innovation Journey, and it's about a 5-minute read, and generally I publish it on Mondays. And if you'd like to see that, and it just talks about, whatever, usually it's whatever happened that week, that's what I talk about, whatever I learned that week. And then if you want to go even further, I have written a couple of books on the topic, and if you'd like to take a look at those, both of those are available at Amazon. And I wouldn't complain if you bought a copy. And so on top of that, Lean Focus has, if you go to Thought Leadership, which go to Lean Focus, and then right here you see Thought Leadership, then you can see our webinars on many topics. It's not just innovation. And so those are some next steps. And I want to close with this thought. This is one, Eli Goldratt, he's kind of a hero. He was really, to a lot of people's minds, the first lean thinker in product development, project management, and knowledge work, very early, when people were just using it in factories, most people. And I love this. And he's in the book, he's talking about, I start to get frustrated. I smile and I count. People are good. Conflicts can be removed. This is a simple situation, even if it looks complex. We can make this better. Every person can reach a full life, and there's always a win-win solution that comes from cutting waste. So Eli Goldratt, he's the one that invented that term, bottleneck constraint. His theory of constraints has guided me in so many of the things I've worked on. You won't be wasting time if you read work from Goldratt. With that, I want to thank you guys so much for your attention and your interest. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to take a try at answering them.
Thank you so much, George. That was another excellent presentation, and really appreciate your insights here. So to the audience, if you are on mute, but you can go ahead and type in any questions for George that you'd like to have him answer into the chat function. So please feel free to do so. So George, a question for you. People want to know about an example of how this has really accelerated a project in the past. Can you share a story?
Yeah, I can give you a story of a project. We were working on one project with a company, and the project time was we could not get it under, I think it was 22 months. And the leadership of the company wouldn't approve it if we couldn't get it down to, I want to say 18. I think it was a 4-month difference. And because we had a phase gate system, we were meeting at at the beginnings of one of the phases, we had manufacturing in the room with us. So we weren't just trying to do it as a group of engineers, but we had manufacturing, marketing, engineering, science, a complete cross-functional team. And we could not find, I mean, we tried for days and actually for weeks before the project, because we knew this was a problem, for days at the event. And we could not solve it until we realized that there was a way to use through the manufacturing, breaking down the silo of manufacturing. We had built the project around doing the design work and then doing hard tooling, and there was just no way to build this product with soft tooling. But we could build it for 4 months with soft tooling. And the soft tooling was pretty inexpensive, and we worked out a way to do soft tooling, which allowed us, because we have a production ramp, and the first 4 months was pretty low production. And so what happened, we were able to accelerate the project the 4 months because we basically came up with this idea working with manufacturing on how to do the soft tooling. That got the project approved. I will tell you, not just accelerated, that project was DOA. Like the leadership was not going to sign up for that project at 22 months. We had been trying 4 months. And so, I mean, I think that's just one example that, we had this very clear cross-functional team together to talk about the project right at the beginning, about how we were going to lay it out, what the requirements were. We knew exactly what the production ramp was. We brought that in. All of those pieces were there because we had a strong phase gate system. And then we broke down the silos. And I would say we didn't accelerate a project. We revived it. By the way, that project turned out to be one of the company's most successful over that year or two. We exceeded revenue that was expected. We had a customer that left us and came back because of that project. So I attribute all of that virtue to the phase gate system that got that cross-functional team in that room talking about the right things.
That's great. Thank you so much, George. Now, you've said that there's bloat in phase gate systems. Can you name a few examples of bloat?
Yeah. Bloat generally comes, what happens is companies will create a phase gate system or some kind of requirement system. And then a couple years later, somebody will come and improve it, but they won't really do the hard work with the Makagami and the pound paper and really fully integrate it. So they create kind of another system. Maybe they create a software system, a system around software that kind of sort of ties into the hardware system, but then it's murky. And then you start having requirements in both, and then the people in the software group wind up responding to hardware requirements, and the people in hardware maybe even have to deal with some software issues. Usually it's more the other way. Usually the hardware one was first. And then the software people are having to meet requirements that really don't apply. And so that's an example of bloat. I would say another example of bloat would be we do a design, we come in with some rules about how to do something because of how we manufacture, but that was 8 years ago and our manufacturing floor is different. Maybe it's even a different manufacturing floor and the same rules don't apply, but we never went back and looked at the requirements and adjusted. So those are a couple of examples that come to mind.
And George, with that, or with those examples, when you see these incidents of bloat, does that also create scope creep between the phase gates?
I would say, I'm sure it does. What I normally see is, you get bloat, and with bloat comes confusion. And then people see 3 documents and they don't know which one to do. They get confused, and when you're confused about something like that, it's not like you're going to keep beating on it. You just want to be like, I'm going to go do the best I can. That would be the norm. And then what happens is the product doesn't meet the requirements when we get to the end because whatever the people doing the development did, it wasn't exactly the right thing because we didn't think through it because they're responding to these 5-year-old documents and they were never perfect. And so then you get to go back and do it again. And then what happens, April, what happens is you do get scope creep because someone comes and says, well, now the project's got to be extended 5 months, but can you put this and that feature in it? Because, now we're in a new place and we have to do these new things because the competitor came out with something. So just by virtue of doing something too slowly, you wind up getting scope creep because the competitor's not sitting still.
Yeah, that makes sense. No. So this question's come in. Where I work, I see the phase gate systems as a bureaucratic exercise. How are you avoiding that?
Yeah, that happens a lot. And where I really see that is where there's a phase gate system, especially in a regulated company, but you see it everywhere. Somebody in quality maybe, or somebody in engineering 5 years ago, or the project management office created a document. It goes and sits in somebody's drawer somewhere or a file cabinet, doesn't really get used. And then every time you want to try, then there'll be like a fluff up, something goes wrong, somebody complains, you're not using the phase gate system. And then it's not really something living. And if you want to get rid of the bureaucracy of it, it's got to be alive. If your phase gate system isn't changing every 3 to 6 months, something's not right, because you've got to be learning every 3 to 6 months. And if you're learning in your company and it's not being reflected in your phase gate, it means those learnings are being lost. And so I think the number one way to avoid the bureaucracy is have it living, because once it's living, that means the team that uses it will take it over, which is a theme of lean thinking from, in all areas, whether you're on the factory floor or on R&D. That team that uses it is that team that owns it. And so by keeping it living, that's what takes the bureaucracy out of it.
And you can also see a lot of engagement when you own those processes versus have to implement something someone else created as legacy.
Oh my gosh, it's so different. When a new person shows up and they want to cut corners, you've got a team of people that are like, no, that's not how we do it here. It's not that's not how the boss says. That's not how this team does it. And that phenomenon happens. And it's just like a sports team. New person joins the team, and that team is then like, hey, you got to stay with us. You can't go do what you like. This is our team. And that's exactly what you build, that esprit de corps, that engagement, because people own the process. And then the other thing I'll add to it, April, is when something's wrong, the people who own the process are the first to figure out, how did we miss that? What did we do? We got to go find out what the problem is. And so they'll be also very quick to jump on it and fix it.
Fantastic. Last question before we close out. Our problem right now is getting our projects to come in on time. Does a phase gate system do that?
Yeah, I think it really does. I talked about that one example where we revived the project just a moment ago. But yeah, by giving every developer on the project a clear statement of what's expected, you're going to get better performance from every person. Doesn't mean perfect, but if the rules are clear and I didn't follow them, you know what? I'm going to be a lot faster about fixing it. So, to give you an example, if I'm working in hardware and I put I put something together that production can't build, if they just come and say I can't build this, I'll be like, well, that's not my problem. But if they show up and say, here's our design for manufacturing document, and here are the 6 things you violated, I'm going to grab that document. I'm going to go fix everything I can as fast as I can. You see, by having clear rules, you create real ownership. And it's that ownership that gets that person in that moment when something's wrong. What is it that person says, I own this, I'm going to go close this gap, or this is not my fault, somebody else can fight with it. And a clearer phase gate system, it builds that ownership. And the more the team owns it, the more that ownership amongst each individual. And and I forget who said it, it falls out of my head right now. I want to say Kim Blanchard, but I could be wrong about that. But it's people will do more not to let their teammates down than they will not to let their boss down. By creating a living phase gate system that's owned by the team, you're creating teammates. And if you have that sense that you're letting your teammates down, you will bust your butt to figure out how to make it right. But if you feel like somebody's just pointing a finger at you from afar, it doesn't have that effect.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you so much, George. This was a fantastic presentation, and we'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. We appreciate the questions. The webinar is recorded and it will be shared about Business Day Out. Benjamin, you asked the question of once this recorded webinar is sent out, can I share it? Certainly you can share the link. The attendees will also need to register in order to view the recording, so please feel free to do so. So thank you all once again. Appreciate your time and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.